This is CityCast Twin Cities. I'm Sean McPherson, and here's what the cities are talking about.
Today on CityCast Twin Cities, we're talking about the new reality for the Twin Cities and Minnesota after the killing of Renee Good by a federal immigration agent on Wednesday. And later we'll be joined by Senator Doron Clark, who represents parts of Minneapolis in the state Senate. Before we get into the show, we want to send a welcome to our new neighbors, Jennifer W. and Menaka M. To learn more about becoming a CityCast neighbor, visit our website at membership.citycast.fm/Twin Cities. Quick programming note here. While we were recording today's episode, the Star Tribune identified the ICE agent that shot Renee Nicole Good, who also went by Renee Nicole Macklin Good. That officer was identified as Jonathan Ross. As of this recording, ICE has not released any details about the agent's identity. The Star Tribune reports that Ross was previously involved in an immigration-related arrest where he was dragged from the outside of a vehicle while the driver was trying to flee. So if you are wondering why we don't name the officer in the episode, it's because we recorded this after that news broke. All right, we're talking with some lawyers today because there's a lot to talk about where we need information from folks who are well-versed in the law. We're going to be talking with a lawyer from the U, experienced in matters of state security and legal regimes, and a lawyer on the front lines of protecting rights and liberties with the ACLU. Now, this isn't the first killing that's connected to ICE raids. In fact, the trace counts 13 shootings, and they think that is likely an undercount. Right now, it's Thursday morning in the Twin Cities. Emmanuel Mauleón, how are you feeling about the situation in the Twin Cities right now?
As someone that's grew up here and that lives here, taking my lawyer hat off, it feels hectic, overwhelming, echoes of 2020, certainly. And certainly as somebody with the legal expertise to respond, I always say it's never a good day when someone wants to speak with me. So I'm speaking to a lot of people today, so that might be an indication of how I'm feeling.
And Alicia Granse, who we've had on the show before from ACLU, Minnesota, how are you feeling today?
That is a really hard question, Sean. Tired, sad, but also ready to get out there and defend some constitutional rights and talk to people about being a community and banding together to make sure that we get justice and accountability.
And I should also introduce a non-lawyer on the call who's going to be talking during this section, our CityCast contributor and podcast producer, Hans Buetow. Hans, welcome. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, so I'll offer you up the first question to give to our friends from the world of law.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me be here. And I do have a question for you two first to start out. So I think in a broader sense, following the rules isn't necessarily how the administration really wants to run things. But if we look at the rules, what's the legal authority for ICE even to be here in the states, in Minnesota specifically, in the first place?
ICE absolutely has the authority to enforce federal immigration law. And so they can be in the state of Minnesota with the aim of enforcing federal immigration law. What they're doing is I think, far exceeding their mandate. They're not here about safety. They're not really here about immigration. They're here to terrorize our immigrant neighbors and citizens alike. So they're far exceeding any authority that they do have to be here, I think.
So if they are allowed to be here, when we have things like on Wednesday when Mayor Frey comes out and says, get the expletive out of Minneapolis, or you have Walz saying, we've never been at war with our federal government, if they're allowed to be here, what weight do those words carry? What sort of levers do any local officials have to be able to keep ICE out? Is it even possible? What can they do?
Like Alicia said, they have the authority to be here to enforce immigration laws. That does not mean they have the general authority to be out in the street terrorizing citizens and things like that. But to say something like get the F out of the city or, we're at war, I think is more of an expression of frustration more than the legal tools available to the government to be able to, get ICE to leave. ICE has to leave voluntarily. DHS has to make the decision to stop the deployment voluntarily. There's a lot of ground in between get out and limiting what they can do. And so to the extent that Walz can do something, Walz in the state government has already limited the ability to be on state property, for example, and so to the extent that you have areas that are within state control, exclusive state control, they can say, we're not going to allow ICE officials to be on that property. They can also limit the information sharing between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, which they not only have they done in the local level in Minneapolis, has taken a strong stance, but I believe the AG came out with a rule maybe 2 weeks ago before the holidays to suggest that any sort of other state agencies that are trying to cooperate with ICE are not allowed to do so without state oversight and without state approval. And so there's some pushback that's occurring to try and limit the amount of law enforcement sharing, but certainly you can't say get out and have that be sort of a legal mandate that they get out.
Let's stay on the subject of things that can actually be done, because there's often a surplus of frustration. And I understand not only the desire, but also, frankly, the value to sort of throw a couple expletives in there and let them know you're serious. But there is a lot of modifications to what ICE is able to do in our state that don't necessarily come from what will happen from state leaders, but will come from lawyers from the ACLU. Particularly, the ACLU is suing ICE for allegedly violating the constitutional rights of legal observers. So, Alicia, y'all are doing more than tossing out expletives. This is Alicia Granse from the ACLU, Minnesota. Can you talk about what you're doing in legal filings to try to change what ICE is doing in our state?
As you mentioned, we did file a lawsuit. We have 6 named plaintiffs in that case, all of whom experienced the violation of their constitutional rights, be it arrest, unlawful arrest for simply standing by and talking to ICE agents, observing them, being pulled over for following and observing ICE officers, having guns pointed at people, use of chemical irritants in people's faces, again, for no lawful reason. We have asked for injunctive relief, which is essentially like a restraining order for the non-lawyers out there, asking the court to prohibit ICE from engaging in conduct like that. As lawyers, a lawsuit is one piece of the puzzle. And so I just want to say that, we're standing up for the community's rights, but I am absolutely in awe of all of the protesters and observers who continue to go out there and continue to exercise those constitutional rights. It's an amazing thing to see. So I will do my part as you all in the community continue to do yours.
This is an opportunity to talk a little bit about the protest that happened on Thursday morning. I was there at the Whipple Federal Building, as was Adam Sage, a creative producer for CityCast. And a lot of what I was trying to do was, for lack of a better term, catch the energy and get a sense of what was happening on the ground and seeing who was there. And I saw hundreds of people there. I did see 2 people arrested. I have some specific questions about that. But Alicia, I was filled with a lot of the same feelings that you have of going, this is a lot of courage of everyone who's out there, especially given what happened this week. The folks that I saw get arrested were getting arrested not by people who had ICE on their chest, but had Border Patrol on their chest. And I sort of want to ask 2 questions I would ask of any lawyer that was sitting next to me at a bar. So not like, oh, I know Emmanuel has some specialties. Alicia clearly is focused on the work of the ACLU. Okay, if Border Patrol is only supposed to be 100 miles within a border, we're not 100 miles within a border. So how do people have Border Patrol on their jacket get to arrest people in Minneapolis?
I'm happy to jump in, and then Alicia, you can follow up. So Sean, you're right. The extent of Border Patrol's jurisdiction is within 100 miles of the border. That is territorial borders. That is also water borders. There's also that's always a creeping distance. Sometimes there's exceptions made. Courts make minimal exceptions. They say, oh, this is related to the border enforcement aspects. But then sometimes you deputize or federalize agents from one agency and you shift them over to help with other priorities, with other enforcement priorities, just as you might. So there's not been a lot of transparency about what's happening, why CBP is here, how things are functioning within DHS, how agents are being moved about different agencies. So to the extent that they have the Border Patrol flak jacket, but they're enforcing because they've been deputized for some other reason, that might be the reason why they are there. But to the extent that they are allowed to use the specific carve-outs of the Fourth Amendment, that is only supposed to be happening within the 100-mile distance from the border. However, we've seen recently, and I'm sure Alicia knows this this in a case, Noam v. Vasquez Perdomo, Justice Kavanaugh have seemed to suggest that those earlier carve-outs get to creep much further outside of that 100-mile radius.
So can you all help us understand? I am very confused with the stew of acronyms and names that are now present on the ground, and how fluid they seem to be representing themselves to the public. We touched a little bit about this on the show yesterday. Tane Danger was talking about the confusion that can arise when you have ICE agents who are wearing police on the back of their flak jackets. They're introducing themselves as, when people introduce themselves as part of the sheriff's department, nobody's quite sure if they are or if they aren't. Are they CPB? Are they border agents? What's the difference? How can they just call themselves police and wear those vests if they're not? Is the FBI really here? I just so much mistrust of everything. And then you have Walz coming in and saying, like, we might activate the National Guard. So there's this whole other level, like possibly military. Can you help us unpack how, when you're standing on a corner or when you're out there and you see these words and names, how should we think about them?
I mean, fundamentally, so many of these are now housed under one agency, the Department of Homeland Security. And that stems from changes after 9/11. As Emmanuel was mentioning, they can be deputized to move from agency to agency. And that is also true often with some of our local law enforcement. They're participating in task forces with the federal government all the time. Hennepin County does that. Minneapolis Police Department does that. Those task forces are happening across the state all the time. What we can do is remind people of their rights when interacting with anyone who has police or any type of law enforcement gear on. You have the same rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to ask for a lawyer. You can ask, am I being detained? And if you're not being detained, you can leave.
Yeah, I would just echo what Alicia is saying. Your rights against the government are secured by the federal constitution, by our state constitution as well. They essentially mimic the federal rights, but they're rights against the government for your security. Rights in theory, as Alicia knows, because you're only fighting these rights after an enforcement action has occurred. You're doing this in court. So it's not that you assert your Fourth Amendment right in person and then suddenly it's like, oh, you've waved the magic wand and we won't engage in enforcement actions. But you should know that you have the right to not comply. You have the right to not answer questions. One of the things that law enforcement is trained to do is to get people to talk even when they don't want to talk. They ask questions in a forceful manner that makes you believe that you don't have a choice, even when you might have a choice, even when you can say, can I walk away? Even when you could say, I'm choosing not to respond to your questions, and so they're not required to tell you the extent of your rights, the extent of the rights that you can enjoy at the moment. They are allowed to lie to you during investigations. They're allowed to misrepresent facts. So one of the things, whether you're pro-enforcement or not, the good advice is just to never engage if you don't have to, because you never know, what that information is going to be used for. I think there's two different things that occurred to me while Alicia was speaking. There's two scenarios. One is where law enforcement is approaching you, and then one is where you're approaching law enforcement. And those two come with very different loaded expectations about and different coercive pressures. And so you might feel less free to exercise rights to observe if somebody's approaching you with a gun. You will feel maybe more free if you're, just joining a big group of protesters. And so you should also be aware of the personal risks that you're willing to take on, not take on. Be aware, be situationally aware, because again, your legal rights are something that occur in a courtroom that you hash out at that point in time. But to be safe on the street is a different question.
We're going to continue our conversation with Emmanuel Mauleón, an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, and Alicia Granse, an attorney from the ACLU Minnesota. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. Thursday morning was not my first time at a protest. It was my first time looking face-to-face with masked agents. I have to admit that I think that if they had written the Constitution after COVID, if COVID had happened in 1722, they would have been like, you can't wear masks in these situations. It's just, this is a smaller point than some of the other ones we're making, but I can't tell you, this is my first day, or Thursday is my first day where I go, it is so alarming to have authority be masked. And if I don't know if that is ever going to change. I think Gavin Newsom tried to change it or is trying to change it in California. That would be one of the top priorities for me, is that if somebody is going to detain me, I can see their face while they detain me. It just seems so immoral to have people doing this work masked. It seems antithetical to what this work is supposed to be about.
It is absolutely antithetical to the idea that we can hold law enforcement accountable for their actions, and the idea that they are doing this in our name, but they don't have the courage or the conviction to do it in the air, in the open. Minnesota has a mask ban. We have a statute that doesn't permit people to go about masked, with certain exceptions, for religious or health reasons. What is hard is getting anybody to enforce that against the federal government. Is the issue, right? Is an MPD officer going to go up to an ICE agent and say, "Excuse me, I have to ticket you for wearing a mask in public"? There's also some issues like First Amendment issues, privacy issues with not allowing people to wear masks. And so we'd have to think about that, is there a law that is going to stand up to constitutional scrutiny? Is that something that do we want other people to be able to wear masks? Is this just a law enforcement issue? I think what it really says is this administration is bent on acting in the shadows and avoiding a scrutiny. They're covering up what they're doing, and they're also lying about it. And one of the ways that they can avoid accountability is being masked, running around in unmarked vehicles, switching out license plates, all things that they're doing, again, to hide, to act as a secret police force. Mm-hmm. In Minnesota, we just like our nice, quiet lives here.
Yeah, I might add, Sean, you said something about if the framers had written the Constitution way back when, they might have added a mask ban, but this is not the first time that this has been invoked. In fact, the first mask bans were part and parcel of the Civil Rights Acts, and they were intended to prevent people from wearing Ku Klux Klan hoods while engaging in illegitimate terrorism of the population. One thing that always strikes my students as whether it be interesting or ironic, is that we sue police officers under the first statute under Section 1983, which was passed when federal enforcement was working hand in hand with white nationalist supremacists in committing racial terror. And so we still use that statute to hold law enforcement accountable when violating constitutional rights against citizens. And so, and it was because of concerns of what's happening exactly now. It's unmasked law enforcement working hand in hand with vigilantes to terrorize portions of the community without any sort of accountability. And so this is certainly unique, I think, for the modern era, but it is part and parcel of our history and our legal response as well.
Emmanuel, what prevents Chief Brian O'Hara from finding his most trusted police officer and say, go arrest the person that we saw on camera shoot into the car of Renee Good?
I think political more than legal questions arise more quickly. We rarely see law enforcement officers arrest enforcement officers that violate the law within their own agency. So to suggest that you're going to do it against the feds, I think that person would feel like, I'm not, just at a point of personal risk. I'm not going to be the officer that goes to get, knocks on the door of the federal building and says, okay, give me the officer. That's the political sort of calculation. There is legal precedent for arresting federal agents for charging them with crimes. But again, you have to meet the legal standard. And as we saw today, the BCA has been cut out of the investigation. To the extent that you don't know where they are and the feds aren't sharing that information, that's also going to get in the way. And to the extent that the federal law enforcement say that you're doing that impedes a federal investigation, there's constitutional issues with the supremacy clause that suggests that the feds get first dibs, first bite at the apple at this. But let's say that they develop probable cause to effectuate an arrest and they're able to identify the person and they're able to find the person. There's nothing legally that suggests that they should not be able to do so, except for, all of those exceptions I've already named. But that would be one way to signal very seriously that we're going to, we might not be able to kick ICE out, but we'll hold them accountable locally. That would be one way to do so.
That was Emmanuel Mauleón, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota Law School. Alicia Granse of the ACLU, Minnesota. Thank you as well for taking time out of the important work you're doing to talk with us.
Thank you.
We'd love to hear from you. There's so much happening in the Twin Cities, and we'd love to get your perspective. Let us know by sending a text or leaving a voicemail on the CityCast Twin Cities hotline. The number is 612-217-0637. We might air your comments in an upcoming episode. We have another conversation coming up with Senator Doron Clark. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. Joining the show today, we also have Senator Doron Clark, whose district includes Northeast and Southeast Minneapolis. Welcome to CityCast, Senator Doron Clark.
Thanks for having me. Glad to join.
Before we get into a conversation, if I may, I'd like to read the statement that was released by the Minneapolis delegation. Are you comfortable with that?
Please do.
This statement was released on Wednesday, so when they say today, they are referring to Wednesday. We are horrified by the news that an ICE agent has shot and killed a person in Minneapolis today. We share our deepest condolences to the victim and her family and the entire community impacted by this violence. One thing is clear, ICE must be held accountable for their actions. Federal law enforcement does not have free rein to inflict harm and pain on our community. We call on ICE to leave our city and state now. Our priority remains protecting lives, ensuring that heightened tensions do not lead to further violence, and seeing that a full and truthful investigation is performed with state involvement. We urge our neighbors to avoid the area for the safety of all involved. And for those who are curious what the Minneapolis delegation is, it's the individuals in the state Senate who represent Minneapolis, including Bobby Joe Champion, Scott Dibble, Doron Clark, Omar Fateh, Zainab Mohammed, and Senator Melissa H. Wickland. Senator Clark, since that statement has come out, one of the things you hoped is already not going to happen because the BCA says that federal officials have reversed course and the FBI is going to investigate without assistance from the BCA, which means there is not going to be state involvement in this investigation. This is very scary to me and very troubling to me. How are you and the rest of your people from the Minneapolis delegation feeling about this development?
We don't like it, and we expect that the BCA still conducts an investigation on the state side. State laws were likely violated. It's clear they were, and we need the BCA to make sure that they investigate state law violations. I wish it was with the FBI, but we're going to need to do it on our own. And so that's what I'm pressuring, and my colleagues are all pressuring the governor and the BCA to make sure they figure out a path forward to do so.
But in the Star Tribune, the BCA sort of says, we don't have access to the evidence, so we can't do a sound investigation. So I'm thankful that you're pressuring Governor Walz and that you're pushing for it, but it's a binary. If they don't have access to the evidence, what can they do about it?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that can be gathered and preserved outside of what the ICE agents have. So yes, it looks like the ICE agent may have had a camera or someone with ICE was recording. Well, we may not be able to gather that, but there's plenty of eyewitness results that we need to gather and preserve. And I think this is part of what we need to get in the habit of doing is when state laws are being violated, we preserve them, we preserve the evidence as best we can. And then even if it takes some time, if this is deemed to be murder, well, there's no statute of limitations on that. We can continue to gather the evidence even if it takes longer. But I think we need to, as the BCA and the state of Minnesota, we need to gather, preserve, and, well, defend our rights to make sure that when justice, and I want justice now, when justice can be doled out, we make sure that we have the information that we need.
So speaking of justice, Senator Clark, we talked a little bit earlier today with Alicia Granse from the ACLU Minnesota. And we had this conversation about how it's really hard to hold federal officers accountable in any way on a state charge, especially on a federal charge. And that one of the things that we need to do is talk to our elected officials about passing laws that would allow us to do that, charging federal officers for crimes committed. This is us talking to an elected official. We're talking to you right now. So I want to pose that to you. What would it take for you all to be able to pass a law that would help us be able to hold federal officers accountable?
We're investigating all the ways we can. And where we seem to get to a sticking point, and what Alicia likely talked about, was the preemption laws. And so that's where we need to make sure that we're working with federal our federal congressional folks as well to make it more possible. That's where, we keep looking for ways to pass state laws that we can do that. And we're going to keep working on that. I think in the short term, though, the pressure needs to be on, pressure needs to be on ICE to make sure that they understand that the expectation is they abide by all laws and we want you out. Thanks for being here. Go away. And it's go home and take care of your families. And we don't need you here in Minneapolis. For working through and finding, that's where we need to be diligent and look for all of the ways. We already prohibit, police law enforcement of wearing masks in Minnesota. That is the police officers and the law enforcement that we have jurisdiction over. We don't have jurisdiction over federal folks. And so that's how they get around that. And we don't have the ability with the federal preemption to be able to go after that. But we can say, all right, state and law enforcement folks licensed by the state of Minnesota, you can't, if you see masks on folks, you should go away. So that's a spot where I think we can strengthen our laws. But to Alicia's point, we got to figure out additional ways to make it more difficult for our folks here in Minnesota to work with them and figure out how we can charge them for violating our state laws.
And so when you say preemptive, you're talking about how the federal priorities can supersede the local priorities sometimes, right?
Correct.
And so a follow-up to all that is, in terms of getting these things together, y'all won a special election in the state Senate is now in DFL hands, but the House is controlled by Republicans. So how does your majority factor into this, your majority in the Senate factor into this, and how can you get stuff through with that ecology?
Well, we need to just keep looking for and asking for Republican partners. There's got to be one out there. Republicans need to be seeing the chaos that ICE is causing and going, this is not what we need in Minnesota. And there are ways that we can hold folks to account. And so we need one or two Republicans, and there's got to be a few Republicans who will be willing or brave enough to step and say, all right. So I'm committed to continue to look and continue to try and work to get folks to pass this. But I think in the short term, what we mostly need is residents to stand up and walk up and down our streets and look out for our neighbors. We're obviously not passing the law in the next month, and we need help now. And so that's where residents get out there and make sure you're keeping your eye out for your neighbors and carry a whistle and blow that whistle when you see ICE.
Senator Doron Clark, relative to other politicians, I actually have a tremendous amount of faith in your boots on the ground stuff, because the handful of times I've heard about you before, it's been like, he and Elliot Payne are cleaning up terrible graffiti on the sidewalk. And I go, that looks like a dude who is literally getting his hands dirty. So I understand the value of what you want to see all people doing, which is going around and taking care of the communities they live in and trying to make them as safe as possible. I actually want to ask you a nuts and bolts question about trying to build a little consensus with some Republicans who you think you might have common ground with on these issues. Is that an email? Is that a text? Is that a walk past them in St. Paul? Like, when you actually are going to go try to find some Republicans who you can find some space with, what is your mode of communication, and what are your tricks to make it happen?
Yeah, I'm still looking for tricks to make it happen. But for me, I prefer to work in person. And so if I notice that their car's in the parking lot, I'm going to go, all right, I'm going to walk down to that office. We're not all at the Capitol every day. I'm not at the Capitol today. So it's mostly phone calls. And that's where I think we all need to do better. And it's been more emails in the past, but nuts and bolts, for me, it's going to be picking up the phone more often.
What about how folks in the Minnesota Senate connect to the Minnesota representatives in Washington, D.C.? This is just a blind spot. I have no idea if you have the same amount of access to Tina Smith that I do, or if you have some special lines of communication. So how do you engage with the people in D.C. representing Minnesota?
So each of the congressional offices have sort of set up ways that we call in. If I need to text them, call them, I can directly, but Amy and Tina and Ilhan are getting lots and lots of phone calls. So it's usually more effective for me to go to their staff. And if I need to escalate to them, then I will. So, for instance, my office has been getting a lot of calls on, all right, how do I help somebody who is trying to work through an immigration situation? Now, right now, it's we're just scrambling, trying to keep up. That typically we'd contact Ilhan's office and say, all right, here's the person to work with. And that person who is an expert in the process then helps them through. So we mostly know who are the right people to do the right things at the right time and how to get you through more quickly. So that's where your local legislative office can be helpful. Is like, hey, I need help on this. We are meant to be connectors. So, I think this is where Mamdani talks really well about, the fact that we have this customer service aspect that we need to be doing in our local offices. And that's what we really can be doing with some of these immigration actions right now is, all right, somebody needs to get a passport expedited or a work permit figured out. There is still work that Klobuchar and Smith's and Ilhan Omar's office is able to do, as is each of the congressional offices.
Senator Doron Clark, I want to take a big pause for a moment because I have a question that doesn't relate directly to this huge tragedy that we're facing and dealing with in Minneapolis, but I don't know the next time we'll have the chance to talk to you. We're very thankful you're spending time with us today. I just saw a pretty underwhelming conversation happening in D.C. about fraud in Minnesota that seemed to be very partisan and very non-productive in the sense that I vehemently want less fraud in the state of Minnesota. And I definitely don't think that pointing fingers without any amount of next steps and research is going to make it happen. Is there brighter days ahead for what happens in St. Paul compared to what happened recently in D.C. to get fraud out of Minnesota in ways that really a lot of folks in your position and a lot of folks at the governor's mansion have been asleep at the wheel? Can we look forward to progress on fraud in the coming months?
A year ago, I was running in the special election. And I reached out to Heather Gustafson and said, I think like you, Senator Gustafson, I'm concerned about what's happening. And I said, I like your idea of this OIG, Office of Inspector General, that reports into the legislature. That passed the Senate 60-7. 60-7. We weren't able to get it through the House, but I think that is the path of being able to provide an additional space to give people confidence that we're dealing with it. We put a lot more money into fraud prevention last year. Historically, I've heard folks say, we can't have all this big regulatory administrative oversight. Well, guess what a regulatory administrative oversight includes? Fraud review. And so we've had this ongoing chipping at, we can't have a government that is well-funded. And then that results in, well, we need to do some outsourcing. So I think there's a few things we can do. One, I think that the OIG has a pretty clear path to success. Two, we need to make sure that we are fully funding our agencies so they can have the administrative oversight that includes fraud detection and prevention. And three, there's a lot of things that we should probably be asking schools to do instead of nonprofits, or when we put these additional layers in between the funders and, well, the services, there's more spot for more opportunity for leakage. So I would love to see all of our park buildings also be daycares, and that's government run. I would love to see our schools have more of that as well. So that's where I'm really seeing that we have another opportunity to make things a bit better.
Senator Doron Clark, I wish we were talking under different circumstances, but I do appreciate your willingness to talk to CityCast. I also appreciate your willingness to think about your neighbors and your constituents at this time. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope that we have better weeks ahead in Minnesota.
Looking forward to hopefully a quieter weekend.
That's all for today here on CityCast Twin Cities. I'm your host, Sean McPherson. Alicia Granse, Emmanuel Mauleón, Hans Buetow, and Senator Doron Clark, thanks for being here today. Our executive producer is Anna Weigel. Our creative producers are Adam Sage and Tiffany Bowie. Our audience engagement manager is James Napoli. Our senior account executive is Heather Hull. Post-production this week was done by PJ Shahamet, and our host is me, Sean McPherson. Our theme music is by Carl Christensen. Our all-host episode was produced by Noah Snyderman and Elizabeth Kama. Our mailbag music is by Adam Sage. Our ad music is by Sven Lindvall and Sarah, the instrumentalist from Epidemic Sounds via Getty Images. You can get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to the CityCast Twin Cities newsletter. If you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with a neighbor? We'll see you back here on Monday for more news from around the city.